Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Fred Sievert, renowned speaker and author and former president of the Fortune 100 New York Life Insurance Company. In this show, we have a conversation with Fred about his latest book, Fast Starting a Career of Consequence. In this book, Fred Sievert offers incredible as well as rather uncommon suggestions for how you might move up in the ranks of your company. We talk about starting a new career, re-entering the workforce, or even how to reinvigorate your current career. Now, as a devout man of faith, Fred gives creative insights on how we might balance our activities of faith, family, and career. It's going to be a brilliant show. With that, let's begin. Fred Sievert, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. You know, Fred, I'm very, very interested in what you bring to the table today. You are a man of wisdom with a deep understanding of leadership and personal growth in business as well as personal growth in personal life. To begin with, I'm very curious about your career as president of a company with, Fred, more than 11,000 employees. That's a city. That's a lot of people. I can't even imagine. And so I'm going to ask you an off-the-wall question. What would you say were the most pressing challenges you encountered as the leader of a company that size?
Well, that's a great question. I had a lot of challenges. Virtually every day I was facing some difficult decision. By the way, there were 11,000 employees, but there were also some 50,000 agents around the world. So it was even bigger than you described. There's so many challenges, it's hard to really answer the question succinctly. But I think one of the big challenges is when you have multiple functions reporting to you, as I did at New York Life, have very different personalities in terms of the people reporting to you. You have people who have very different skill sets, different ways of operating. And in a very serious way, you have to adapt to each person. You can't manage each person in exactly the same way. You have to know what drives them, what they're motivated by, and how to inspire them to get things done and achieve success. So many of the principles in the book we're going to talk about relate to kind of the way in which one has to manage and deal with certain human issues. And there definitely were many human issues that I had to face. There were also a lot of business issues.
Of course. You know, it seems to me that you found a blend of empathy and insight. And I think that's unusual. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be common in leadership positions as yours. They seem to be very business-oriented. You obviously had to be very business-oriented at a company of, $50 billion. But it seems that you took the route through people, that people investing in people and people investing in themselves seem to be part of the key to your success. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And one of the challenges I face, just to continue on the earlier question, is delegation. And when I was lower in the organization, I made the mistake a lot of people make of, assuming your employees can't do the job as well as you can. And I found out very, very quickly, especially as I advanced in the organization, I had to delegate much, much more and not micromanage as much as I did. And I think that was an element of my success, was hiring and retaining and developing really strong subordinates who I could fully trust, and therefore able to delegate much more to them. And I think they They appreciated that. I spent a lot of time developing them and coaching them, much like you, Charlie. I mean, I know you coached people and mentored people. I did the same with every one of my employees. I wanted them to improve, and my criticism was always constructive and presented in a way that they appreciated at the end of the day that I gave them that kind of advice.
Yeah, truth with grace and care, there's nothing like it. You know, we run this sort of battle inside of us is that we want to tell the truth, but we don't want to offend. And yet, if we don't tell the truth, we can't serve the organization, we can't serve the individual. If we just keep ignoring because we don't want to offend, that person is going to go nowhere, and we have not served them because we're somewhat intimidated by reactions and responses and hurting and all. And so you seem to have found that blend between caring and truth. And that's amazing. That's a very difficult place to be.
Yep. There's no question. You hit the nail on the head. I worked hard at delivering bad news. You start with a couple complimentary things, and then you say, listen, there's one little thing that you sort of disappointed me, and I want to tell you how you could improve in this area. Then I'd end with some very complimentary statements. So people took that as fine, and they understood my style. And, they knew when that kind of a comment was coming, but they all improved as a result of hearing that kind of feedback.
That's great. And so in response to that, as we chatted in depth earlier this week, and as most listeners know, I chat with my guests before the show. As we chatted in depth, I was most impressed with your commitment to the growth and development of your employees, especially, it seemed to me, especially those employees with a desire to grow in the ranks of management and leadership. Tell me, in business, and I knew in my time in consulting with high-level business executives, we often talk about recognizing what we call high potentials in business. Those people that appear to be on the fast track, they may be management, upper-level management potential. And I have a question that I should have prepared you for, but you're going to have to just come on the spot for this. And so if you would, I would like to know, and as I said, this may be out of the blue, what might you consider to be 3 or so characteristics that represent or identify somebody that begins to reach the high potential criteria? What is about them that makes them different?
Let me start by saying, in answer to that my book and the 10 tips that I give in the book for fast-tracking your career started with me thinking about the very question you just asked me. And that is, how would I recognize someone lower in the organization who I might consider high potential? That was the question I asked myself, and it came as a result of my daughter asking me how to succeed in her company. She was in an entry-level position. Now, some of the things I'm going to say in answer to your question might relate more to someone who's been at the company a while as opposed to someone new to the company. But I think really to make those later leaps in your responsibility and your advancement, I think the most important thing, if you intend to move up, a lot of employees say to me, I want to have P&L responsibility, profit and loss. I want to run a business. But, no matter how big the business is, you only have a limited number of P&L spots. If you're thinking about someone getting to that level, I think probably the number one factor is they can think strategically. And some people will say, well, I just don't have that capability. Well, I have a chapter in the book.
And we're going to talk, and just to let you know, I plan to talk about that as we move on the podcast.
Okay, so I won't get into the details on it. That's it. Secondly, is no matter what department you are in, marketing, sales, finance, no matter where you are, you need a fundamental understanding of the financial underpinnings of the business.
Yeah, and I want to get into that one. That is huge, Fred. When you told me about that, I had never, ever considered that. So again, you know, I hate to do this, but I know we've got lots of questions about that in a bit.
Yeah, okay. I'm just giving you. And the third third one I would mention is having a passion for the mission of the company. Now, that's something that you may not have, and you can't sort of develop it. I mean, it's just inherent in your own value system, beliefs, and your own true interests and skills. I think having a passion for the mission is also extremely important and can be recognized. And again, as you know from our earlier discussion, that was another chapter.
Yeah, and it's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. You know, your suggestions for moving up in the organization and creating a career of consequence are not your typical. You know, they're not the responses I would expect from a president, CEO, leader of an organization. You have some different ideas that I think are going to be really, really helpful on the show. Now, there is much wisdom you offer in the book, Fast Tracking a Career, but you mentioned briefly just earlier about the genesis of the book as it relates to your daughter. Why don't you tell us that story?
Absolutely, yeah. My daughter was just out of college. She had a entry-level position at a big global cosmetics firm. And she came to me. Basically, she was filling marketing orders in the marketing department. She came to me and said, Dad, you know, this is getting kind of monotonous. I want to build a career here. I like it. I want to build a career. I just need to know how to get noticed, how to advance, to be able to take on more responsibility. So I thought long and hard, as I said earlier, about how I would find and notice someone within the organization at a lower level, even as the president of the company. And I came up with 5 tips that I gave to her, and she implemented them and did extremely well. I mean, she was promoted several times in the first 4 or 5 years, and ultimately was a brand manager of this big global marketing company. Now, she's a smart kid anyway and would have done well. I think the tips really helped her, and then I used them in a couple of college commencement addresses, got a lot of really positive feedback. And that resulted in my agent reading an article I wrote, and he said, you know, Fred, he called me and said, you got another book here. And that really was the genesis of the book.
So tell me, what was your daughter's response to your 5 suggestions? And I've got that we're going to cover, I'm going to do my best to cover 4 of them. You know, 5 responses to her. The book has 10 tips, and I want to take a look at 5 of them. But what was your daughter's response when she first, was she surprised at sort of the direction, the simplicity, and the uniqueness? Your questions are really unique. They are not normal questions that I think that the growth-oriented individual enters a company with. Was she somewhat surprised at that, or did she just say, Dad, this is paying off?
I think she was very surprised, and in some cases, terrified is too strong of a word. But she was
challenged,
very, very worried that she couldn't possibly implement a couple of the tips that I gave her, because she didn't have the background and she didn't have the coursework. But then I said to her, you know, I'm going to give you a very simple way to demonstrate these things. Trust me, you will be able to do it without, you know, going and getting an MBA. And she did, you know, but you were right on. We didn't talk about this in our earlier call, but you're right on the mark when you said, how might somebody react? Because you know what she was observing is all of her peers at that level.
Yes.
None of them were doing these kinds.
Well, it's not the stuff you bring up is not brought up in college. You don't see these in an undergraduate course, and I doubt you see them in a graduate course.
You're right. In fact, I do a little bit of guest lecturing on this and get a lot of positive feedback. But yeah, for her, the real point is her peers weren't doing these things, okay? So she differentiated herself by following my advice.
I'm curious, in your hiring, there are people that have a proclivity for leadership, higher level management, and sort of are creative thinkers, have ideas, have mission oriented, have vision. But then, and those are the people that I am understanding they're sort of the target audience of your book. What about the people that just want to go in, they don't want to become a manager, they've got family, they've got a number of things. What about those kinds of people? Do you have, what is your comments or interest in people that just want to do a good job but don't have a desire to be a manager?
Yeah. I think, and I won't talk specifically about any of the tips until you ask me about them. I think a lot of the tips here be extremely useful just to make someone happy in their environment.
Oh.
Because I'm telling them, one of the chapters, which I won't get into detail about, is develop a cultural and organizational awareness. Well, in doing that, you need to meet other people. You need to interact with others in the company. You need to ask them how they contribute to the mission of the company. And in doing that, suddenly you're bridging gaps between departments. And, some companies are siloed into just departments where nobody ever leaves that department. They work their way up to the top, but they never get any higher across multiple departments. And I think even if you have no ambition to manage or to grow, because a lot of people just have really technical jobs, you become a valued employee, and even a more valued employee. You understand the culture. You understand how to get things done. You have friends throughout the organization who can provide you some insights and advice on what you're doing as it relates to your work. And I think the book's equally valuable for someone who's not trying to work their way up to a presidency or a CEO job.
That's really helpful information, and so that makes the book applicable to everybody that goes to work. Anybody that has a job in a company, and even if you're self-employed, there are many tips. There are some of these tips that really work for self-employed people as well as corporate employees.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of people will ask me that question when I've spoken to groups: is what about the entrepreneurial positions? And I say this is very important for those as well, because it's about human relations. It's about understanding multiple aspects of the business, like the financial underpinnings. I mean, you better know that, or you're going to be an unsuccessful entrepreneur. So it applies to big companies, small companies, entrepreneurial ventures. It applies to all of them, and even nonprofits.
So your wisdom today is for everybody listening if they have a job or if they're considering having a job. That I agree with you. I'm looking at the 4 principles that I want to talk about, and every one of them apply to an entrepreneur. If an entrepreneur does not do the suggestions that you take, it's probably not going to be a really successful entrepreneurship, except for that sort of egocentric, narcissistic approach that really doesn't care about the organization. So what do you say we start diving into some of your tips? Oh, and my producer's saying this may be a good time for a break because we're going to take kind of a different direction right now. So why don't we take a brief break, and we will be right back and cover the tips for fast starting your career.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to the next chapter with Charlie and my extra special guest today, Fred Sievert, who is offering wisdom about how to produce and enjoy and engage in the company you're working at. And if you have desires for leadership, for management development, these are even more brilliant suggestions. And I want to remind everybody that Fred certainly knows what he's talking about as CEO of multi-billion-dollar, president of multi-billion-dollar corporation, and with, like, did you say, ended up 50,000 employees?
Even more than that when you include all the agents.
I can't even imagine. That's larger than my city. So you are. so let me go. I have taken artistic license and pulled out 4 of your principles of your tips. And if we have time, if you have something else that you think is critical, please bring them up. But I got a feeling this may consume a bunch of our time. So the first one I'm trying to build on them, but the first one that you say is demonstrate, the first action you need to take is to demonstrate a commitment to the company. Now, although this principle may seem obvious, I'm not sure everyone actively considers that. Oh, for sure, everyone, they want to do a good job, but I wonder if everyone wants to place commitment to the company at the top of their desires or the top of their to-do list. Why is it, Fred, that commitment to the company is so important to employees and especially to potential leaders?
Well, this was the first tip I gave my daughter.
I started with the first tip.
This was the first one. And I said to her, look, this is pretty simple, because as I was looking at things at New York Life and thinking about how someone might get noticed in advance, a really simple part of it, this is going to sound so simple, it's crazy, is said, at least occasionally get to work early and leave late. Because what I noticed walking around the company is people were coming in right at the last minute, sometimes a little late in the morning. They took their time, with their coffee and pastry or whatever. Then at the end of the day, it was like, we used to check out with a time clock. You close up your desk 15 minutes early and you leave. That just didn't sit well with me. And I think it's much more important to demonstrate. Even some of the people at New York Life who I really noticed would come in late or come in, stay late, or come in even on the weekends once in a while. I didn't encourage that because I wanted them to spend family time. But the other thing I said to my daughter is, you need to remain fully engaged in everything you do. In other words, really put in the time. And I also suggested to her that she seek out additional work by talking to people from other departments. And a lot of people would resist that. They'd say, I got enough to do here. But, she was a French major and her company was global. So she offered to do some French translation at the company. People recognized that and clearly helped her a lot. I also said, when you're given projects, come in on time and within budget. Also be vocal about the mission. What I told her about the mission, which actually I have a whole chapter.
Let me hold on that, because that is critical. That's one of the things I want to focus on. But I want to comment. Okay. I want to comment on your previous statement, which was, remind me of your previous statement.
Any projects you're doing, do them on
Yes. I did onboarding for a handful of companies, of larger companies. And one of the things that I put in the onboarding, it was an ongoing discussion with your manager and leader, and to let them know that there are certain attributes, certain qualities, qualifications, experiences that you have had that may not have showed up on your resume. And it's, like a French major, that may or may not have showed up on the resume, as something that they would pay attention, it would be listed under majors. But sure. That is something, your daughter turned that into an advantage. And if you can, in the early stages, let your bosses know that you have other talents and skills that you are very willing to contribute to the organization that may or may not have been on the resume. Do you find that true?
Yes, and in fact, I had a couple of people who reported directly to me who ultimately did extremely well. One of them actually became my successor as president, who did that very thing. I mean, he would frequently say to me, so-and-so's having a little problem in some other department. I can help him with that. I had some background in that the previous job. That kind of thing where they're volunteering not only to do all the load of work they have, to go beyond that in the interest of the company. Very, very impressive.
Thank you. Now, I really want to get into this because I have experience, both positive and neutral and negative experience, with helping organizations create mission statements. Sometimes they're just a plaque on the wall that nobody pays any attention to. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yes.
But successful companies are dedicated to a mission. There is something they're dedicated to a mission, critical success factors, work values. Tell me why this commitment to a mission is critical for your success in an organization.
Yeah, well, there's a couple aspects to this. One is when I first, this was tip number 2 to my daughter. So you're going through right through the list. I said to her, I want you to memorize your company's mission statement.
Now, let me say, no one, never in my history have I ever heard anyone say that.
Yeah.
You're the first. You're the first that I've heard say that.
Yeah, and let me tell you why. And I said to her, I want you to memorize it so you could recite it. Her response was, this goes back to one of your earlier questions. She said, Dad, you really want me to memorize it? And you want me to walk around reciting it? And I said, no. I don't want you to walk around reciting it because it'll appear arrogant. And I said to her, arrogance is one of the biggest career blockers. You do not want to do that. But I want you to be able to recite it because then it's embedded in your brain. And if it's embedded in your brain, you can watch and view the decisions made by superiors, by your peers, and even ultimately your own decisions in the context of that mission, because it's really critically important for an employee at any level where they have the decision-making responsibility to make those decisions that align well with the mission of the company. Very important. And by the way, on another note, I coach people who are interviewing for jobs and say, look, know the mission of that company. You go to the interview. And if it's true, you don't want to say it if it's not true. If it's true, one of the most powerful things you can say in an interview is, I read your mission statement, and I really have a passion for what you're doing. And
boy, that goes a long way. No one tells us that, Fred, and that goes so far. That is so important.
Yeah, and a lot of people, even when I interviewed people, well, I wouldn't ask them have they read the mission, but I'd listen, see if what we do for our business, what our mission is, see if they understand it and they value it and they can commit to it. So that was tip number 2 to my daughter.
That's perfect. I had an experience a handful of years ago of working with SpaceX, and working, in the the LA office. And the one thing about SpaceX, they may be the most demanding company I have ever consulted with. That people worked several hours. But you know what drove the people at SpaceX? They were everybody. I mean, every single person, Fred, of this multi-thousand employee community was committed to putting human beings on Mars. And this mission permeated everything throughout the organization. It is why the organization is so successful today, because every employee is committed to this mission. They believe in the objective and the value to get there. And that's a one organization that you see what they're doing. They had a little trouble today, but they've been.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, they've been inordinately successful, and it is because commitment to the mission. That is the driving force of SpaceX employees.
That's the perfect example. It's the perfect example.
So let's move to
space exploration.
Yeah, yeah, and they really believe in it, and they believe it's going to happen, and they want to be a part of it, and they are excited to work for this company. They are honored to work for this company. Let's move on to what I've taken out is, I don't know if this is really 3 or number 2 or falls later, but I really like this, maybe because it just fits with my personality. But you suggest that employees take charge of their own development. Don't wait for the corporate trainings. Don't wait for all of this. It's your life, your responsibility. Tell me, what do you mean by taking charge of your own development? What does that look like?
Yeah. This was one of the tips I added to one of the original ones, but it was very important. It was very important in my own career, and in today's environment, a lot of pressure on profits. Cutting expenses, not having redundant staff, and so forth, broadening the span of control, et cetera. And so typically, your superiors are not going to put a lot of time and money into your development. So I told, part of the chapter is to say you need to take charge of it yourself. And I gave a number of ways in which to do that. In my case, I'll mention that in a second. I say take the time to go to developmental classes or seminars. You may even have to pay for it yourself initially. Or do something on the weekends, or take a day off and go and do it. Now, it'd be nice if your company authorized it and paid for it. But I'd say do it anyway. Take charge to go to developmental classes and seminars. And the real keys, if somebody asked me what was your key to success, one of them was I used to do this. I'd come back from every one of those meetings or seminars, at least 1 or 2 ideas that I thought my company really needed to implement. When I came back with those ideas, bosses would say, this is terrific. And guess what? Then they were much more eager to have me go to more classes and seminars because they knew I was always coming back with something really useful. And I said another thing you can do is stay current in your own field, especially technical people. Stay current in your field. Join industry organizations. Join even key committees within some of those organizations. And that gives you an opportunity to interface with leaders in your field across the country. I did that also. I was on several American Council of Life Insurance committees and other committees. And it takes a little time. You have to go to meetings and things. But there again, I was always coming back to the company with new ideas and understanding what the competition was doing, which is a very important element of strategic thinking. So I really feel strongly about that particular item because I see so many people who aren't really being developed by their managers. And I mentioned that earlier, that was one of the things you brought up right at the beginning. Is managing the human aspects of the business and developing your employees. So I think that's a very important concept.
How this is truly by guess and by golly, but what percentage of employees do you think actually take active charge of their own development?
Unfortunately, it's pretty small.
Yeah, because because it's not taught to them, Fred. It's not part of the. You think you finish your college degree, which, in my opinion, does not a whole lot to help you in business. That's why I think your own development, many of the courses you attend are better than the college courses that you take because they're very applicable and down to earth and related to your business. And yet, there's I don't know if it's a reluctance or if it's an ignorance. It may be an ignorance to the benefit of what that is doing, and I think you're offering our listeners the benefits of why this is really powerful.
And not only that, it's I've developed lifelong friendships through those developmental activities. People that I've met, especially if I was on a committee, and I've been on a lot of industry committees. Many of my lifelong friends been people I met through those relationships.
As an entrepreneur, I have a insatiable hunger for learning. So, I take online courses. I typically don't go to courses, but I take online courses. I read profusely. I like to go deep into a subject, so I will research it, and it just the value is just immense, and so I so compliment you on that and affirm what you're trying to do. So let's move on. Let's move on to maybe not surprising number 3. It may not be a surprise, but I don't know how many people actually do this one, and you suggest demonstrate strategic thinking capabilities. What in the world is that all about?
That's funny you say it that way, because this was one of the tips my daughter. She looked at me and she said, "Dad, I don't even know what you're talking about."
It sounds like I'm echoing your daughter.
Yeah, really. And I said, "Look, let me give you a quick lesson. The etymology of the word strategy was it was a war term. How do you defeat the enemy?"
Okay.
I said the analog in business is how do you beat the competition. And I said, people aren't born with strategic thinking capability. You can nurture it, you can develop it. And I said the way to do it, because it's so much depends on the competition and how you're doing relative to the competition. I said you need to familiarize yourself with companies' products, services, and target markets. And you can do that just by reading the annual report and other reports on the company. If it's a publicly traded company, there's lots of stuff out there, or internal documents. Read that stuff. Also, here's a crazy idea, right? I said and she could do this because it was a cosmetics firm. I said, but you understand who the competitors are, and you get a list of the competitors from your planning department, who the primary competitors are. Do some mystery shopping, their products. Now buy up their products and compare them against your own company's products, and see how they compare. See what their markets are by reading those same materials, and that stuff's available as well. Their annual report and oftentimes elements of strategy within those reports. To do that as well. And then in my book, I think, Charlie, there's 2 pages in my book I think are the most valuable. I think this chapter in the book, from my perspective, is my favorite chapter.
Oh, really?
Because it really does enable someone to go down this path of developing a strategic thinking capability. And there's a couple pages in that chapter. It's chapter 9 in the book. I think it's on page 104 and 105. There's 8 questions I ask. That not my questions, but questions that the reader should ask about their own company. Like, what is your company's edge over the competition? That kind of thing. What consumer needs are we meeting? Could we expand on that? Are there consumer segments of the market that we're missing? we should be looking into because we have products that they can use. So these kinds of, there's eight or nine questions. Just reading those questions for someone new to a company and thinking about that and then asking about it, among their friends and colleagues and superiors is really going to differentiate them. I think I'm glad you picked that chapter because to me that's the most important one. And you mentioned up front that some of the advice could apply to people who are already existing employees, maybe even for quite some time. I had people reporting directly to me at New York Life didn't really understand the difference between strategy and tactics. Strategy is about beating the competition and gaining sustainable advantage. And this chapter really focuses on that.
That's tell me if I understand this correctly in my mind, because I view myself as a bit of a strategic thinker, and strategy is big picture. It's a little longer term, and it's the overall goal and high level actions that a company will take to resolve an issue or to grow or to become, whatever is our mission. But the tactics are subsumed under strategic thinking. If you have tactics without thinking strategically, you're just running around like a chicken with your head cut off.
Yeah, you got it. A strategy really is meant to identify what you're going to do to gain advantage over the competition or to differentiate your company over the competition. The tactics are, how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
How are we going to implement that? What kinds of steps will we take to do that? What kind of products might we develop that will give us that kind of competitive advantage? And yeah, you've got it. But so many times when you're doing a strategic plan, even top level people just get way down into the weeds of details, but no overlying clear strategy for differentiating the company or beating the competition.
Yes, an approach that is an advantage and that will accomplish, and it's all back to your first statement, a commitment to the company. It's all back to mission, isn't it? It's all back to, are you aligned with your vision and mission in the company? And if your strategic plan is not aligned with that, then you're going to go off kilter. It's really
right.
Now you know what I'm wondering, is strategic thinking common? Is everybody capable of doing that, or are there some individuals whose brains sort of think big picture, and so you have the big picture thinkers, in my mind, the big picture thinkers that coordinate with the doers, and they put it together, and there's this synergy between thinking high level and thinking operational levels that really needs to be going on. So perhaps I'm wondering if not everybody needs to think strategically and think, I'm not going to be a success unless I'm thinking strategically. However, if I'm in operations and you give me a strategy, I can make that happen. Those are both essential to organizations.
It is, absolutely. I think it's pretty rare for someone to have both qualities. The CEO is typically your strategic.
Mm-hmm.
And the chief operating officer normally is more into execution and implementation. But, it's that rare individual who has talent in both areas. And when I designed these tips, I was thinking, if you ultimately want to get to the top, or if you're in an entrepreneurial organization, which may not be very large, I mean, you got to be thinking along both dimensions.
And if you're not thinking strategic, it's a failure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I want to do now in our last bit is, it may not be the last bit if we have time for my final question. this is, when you first told me this final tip, I must admit, I thought, not really. That's, I don't see the advantage of that. So that's why I say you have uncommon advice, because as you explained it to me, I said, oh my goodness, this is the key differentiator, isn't it? And you call it even, I believe in the book, you call it the killer question. And the principle is this: understand the financial underpinnings of your organization. How many employees actually know that? Even at a higher level, do they really know revenues, equities, expenses? Do they understand a spreadsheet?
I think that you're right, and even though I said strategy was probably my favorite and best chapter, this one was the tip I gave to my daughter, which she was, I use the word terrified.
Well, it is. When you explain it to me, it's terrifying.
Yeah. She said she never had an economic class. She never had an accounting class. I don't think she even had a math class in college. And I said to her, I want you to understand the financial underpinnings. She said, Dad, how am I going to do that? I said, look, I'm going to make it simple for you. You're at a low level of the organization. I want you to get a hold of somebody in the accounting department. And you don't need to know how all the line items are put together in the income statement and balance. You just have to become familiar with the income statement, how it flows into the balance sheet. That income impacts the balance sheet. And just go through that, and you'll find somebody who's willing to coach you on that, and you might have to spend a couple of sessions, and you ask a lot of questions. And then I said, once you get comfortable with that, I want you. Her company was, public information. They did quarterly reports, and I said, what I want you to do is develop a spreadsheet, which she knew how to do. I said, develop a spreadsheet that's going to have 6 numbers on it. From the balance sheet, assets minus liabilities equals net equity. Just pick out those 3 subtotals: assets, liabilities, net equity. And then from the income statement, you've got revenues minus expenses equals net income. Pick out those 3 numbers. So you have 6 numbers on this.
6 numbers to memorize, or to understand. Not
even to memorize, just to track.
Just to understand. Yeah.
Just put them on a sheet. And just watch it quarter by quarter. Really simple. And and I said to her, I got people reporting to me. If I went to a staff meeting, I had 12 people reporting to me, and I said, somebody tell me what the revenue was last quarter. No one would. Maybe the marketing guy, maybe the CFO would immediately have a good idea. But I'm telling you, most people would stare into the deer into the headlights. They don't watch this stuff. And I said, here you are, low in the organization, watching it quarter to quarter. You can actually then use that to trigger questions like, why are revenues up significantly, but net income is not up as much?
Right.
What's happening to the investment portfolio? What's happening to the investment portfolio? Because we're losing asset value, and yet the company's growing in terms of sales. These kinds of questions you could go back and ask in the accounting department or the finance department. The people are going to notice that you did that. And I said the final thing is, I said, once you've done that for a while, I want you to ask what I called the killer question. And I said, Dina, you're going to have to ask it exactly the way I'm saying it to you, and that is, what drives the profitability of this business? Because every business has certain profit drivers. There's certain elements of what you're doing to drive the profits. And it's not just increased sales. It might be how you go about increasing sales. It might be how you structure your distribution chain or your supply chain. Well, there's a lot of answers that could be, but you want to get a decent answer to what's really driving the profitability. And later I said to her, when you even get down into business units, you can do the same, because it might vary by business unit.
Yeah, of course it does.
And I said to her, Charles, I said, I wouldn't be surprised if the CEO of the company, some young girl out in the marketing department, is asking these kinds of questions. And you know what? He did hear.
Yeah,
He did hear. This is a big global company. Now, what better way to differentiate yourself? You asked the question, how do you become viewed as a high potential employee? I don't think there's a better way.
Yeah, I so agree. Once you explained it to me, I just said, oh my goodness. I've never heard of anybody asking these questions, and yet it does differentiate the employee, and it will draw attention of the executive saying, there's somebody asking really important questions. I wonder who this person is. And so all of a sudden, if nothing else, you're on the radar.
Well, I was going to say, you remember I said that a lot of people ask to run P&Ls and profit and loss statements?
Yeah.
There's a perfect candidate. Somebody in the marketing department who's asking what drives the profitability of the business.
Yeah. What this really ties to very directly to your tip number 1, demonstrate a commitment to the company. This is demonstrating a commitment to the company when we're asking detailed questions, in-depth questions about how does this work. Brilliant. That to me, there's so many ahas in talking to you and checking through your writing that are there. Now, you know what I want to do in our last, we don't have much time left. I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask the question that your book is a very faith-based book. And so you're talking about Christ-centered principles, biblical principles, and the first half of your book defines the relationship between those principles and a successful business. Here's what I'm curious about. One of the things that is very important to you is this balancing act of faith, family, and career. And I know that's very important to you. Can you just, because as I pointed out, we're running short on time, but I really do want to hear your opinions on that. Can you give me feedback on the balance of faith, family, and career?
My first book, God Revealed, talks about my faith and that background. I won't get into that.
Okay.
I always felt that, I made the mistake of thinking that on Sundays I was a Christian, on Monday I was an employee, and on Saturday I was a husband and a father. Okay. In reality, you're all those things all the time. So I've always talked to my employees, and I wanted them to do their best to balance faith, family, and career. The very last chapter in the book is that chapter on balancing faith, family, and career, where I talk about coping techniques, because, a job like the one I had was almost 24/7, 52. But I had ways of communicating with the family daily. I took each one of my 5 kids on trips with me once a year. I really think that was my legacy to the New York life. Talking about the trips I took with my kids, because so many people adopted that same practice. But I also, every morning, I'd get up and exercise. I'd send emails to each one of my kids and my wife. I'd do some scripture reading and go through my prayer list. I felt by the time I left for the work at 6 a.m. or 6:30, before anybody else is really up and going to work, I just had a very fulfilling morning, balancing those things. Now, it's always better to speak directly to your family members, to do things together, and to plan things together, spend time. But, at least I was doing my best every day to create that balance. And I think it made a very big difference for me. My employees appreciated it. Many of them emulated it. I hear about it now, even now, years after retirement, people who adopted some of those same practices. Extremely important.
If our Christian practices do not impact our daily life, there's a disconnect. And I wanted to just briefly share in closing, you're taking your trips with your family. I'm the father of an only son, and at probably 8, 9, and 10. He and I, in California, you will hear of June Lake. He and I would take 2 or 3 days and go fishing. Now, we both hated fishing. This was not this, but it was the idea of just the two of us going on an adventure and being together, spending time together. And it was, we remember those days to today. So I certainly support your advice in that. Fred Sievert,
same experience.
You really are something. I so appreciate your willingness to come on the show and chat with me. That is so kind of you.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. My pleasure. I've watched some of your earlier shows, and I was very impressed with the conversational nature of it.
Thank you.
And it was always, I'm so glad that I had a chance to join in on that, because as a listener, I was hearing two or three brilliant people talking to each other as if they're in the living room somewhere. Now I've had a chance to join
the living room. Well, thank you. Your insights are brilliant, and I also want to remind our listeners to check out your latest book, Fast Starting a Career of Consequence, and a link is provided on the show notes so people can look up your book and purchase it. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. It's a great show.
Thank you. I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.